Get off my plane. Now!" Those were the words Captain Brock Harrison spat at the woman sitting quietly in seat 1A. He thought he was clearing out a fraud, someone who had snuck into first class while the real VIPs were boarding. He saw the color of her skin, the hoodie she was wearing, and he made a decision that would cost him everything. He didn't know that the woman he was humiliating wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just a millionaire. She was Vivienne Toussaint, the majority shareholder of the very airline he flew for. And she wasn't just going to file a complaint. She was about to teach him a lesson the entire aviation industry would never forget. Buckle up. You are not ready for this landing. The rain at Heathrow Airport was relentless, hammering against the fuselage of the Boeing 777-300ER like handfuls of gravel. Inside the cabin of Meridian Air, Flight 404 bound for New York's JFK, the atmosphere was a meticulously curated bubble of warmth and soft jazz. Vivienne Toussaint adjusted the noise-cancelling headphones over her ears, though she hadn't turned them on yet. She simply wanted the silence. She pulled the hood of her oversized charcoal cashmere sweater up slightly. It was a chaotic week. A hostile takeover bid for her tech conglomerate, Toussaint Systems, had kept her awake for 72 hours straight in a boardroom in London. She had won, of course. Vivienne always won. But the victory had left her bones feeling like heavy lead. She wasn't dressed like a billionaire. She was dressed like a woman who wanted to sleep for 8 hours straight. Leggings, expensive but worn sneakers, and a vintage university hoodie. No makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. The only hint of her status was the watch on her wrist, a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, but it was currently hidden under her sleeve. "Champagne, madame?" Vivienne looked up. The flight attendant, a young man named Leo, with a kind, nervous smile, was holding a tray of crystal flutes. "Just water, please. Sparkling if you have it," Vivienne said softly. Her voice was raspy from days of negotiating. "Of course." Leo placed the glass down on the linen coaster. "We're just waiting on a few late connections, then we'll be pushing back. Make yourself comfortable." Vivienne nodded and closed her eyes. She had bought Meridian Air 6 months ago. It was a quiet acquisition, done through a shell company, Valkyrie Holdings. She liked the airline's legacy, but the financials were messy. She was flying commercial today specifically to see the product from the inside, incognito. No entourage, no assistants. Just her. She was just drifting off when a heavy thud of footsteps vibrated the floorboards. The air pressure in the first-class cabin seemed to drop, the relaxed atmosphere instantly tightening. "I don't care what the manifest says, Sharon. I'm telling you, the weight distribution is off, and we have a standby list a mile long with actual paying heavy hitters." The voice was deep, authoritative, and laced with an arrogance that made Vivienne's eyes snap open. Standing at the front of the cabin was the pilot, Captain Brock Harrison. He looked like the poster boy for aviation. Silver fox hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and a uniform that was pressed to razor-sharp perfection. He was a senior captain, the kind who had flown for 30 years and believed the plane was his personal kingdom. He was scanning the first-class cabin, his eyes darting over the passengers. A tech CEO in 2A, a famous actress in 3F, an elderly oil tycoon in 1F. Then his eyes landed on 1A. Vivienne saw the shift. It was subtle, a micro-expression of disdain that flickered across his face before settling into a mask of cold professionalism. He looked at her hoodie, he looked at her messy hair, he looked at her skin. He turned to the lead flight attendant, Sharon, a woman who looked like she'd been crying recently. "Who is that?" Brock asked, his voice low but carrying in the silent cabin. "That's Miss Toussaint, Captain," Sharon whispered, checking her tablet. "She's a full-fare first-class passenger." "Full fare?" Brock scoffed. He glanced back at Vivienne, who was now watching him calmly. "Unlikely. System glitch, probably. Or an upgrade error. Look at her, Sharon. Does she look like she dropped 20 grand on a seat? She looks like she got lost on her way to economy basic. "Captain, please," Sharon hissed. "The boarding is complete. We need to leave. I have a Diamond Medallion member from the energetics sector throwing a fit at the gate because we're full," Brock said, checking his watch. "Mr. Kensington, a personal friend of the CEO. I'm not letting him sit in business while some non-revenue lucky winner sits in 1A. Vivian didn't move. She didn't speak. She waited. In business, you never interrupt your opponent when they are making a mistake. You let them dig the hole. Brock walked over to a seat. He didn't bend down to eye level, a standard courtesy. He towered over her. "Ma'am," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a command. "I need to see your boarding pass." Vivian slowly reached into the seat pocket, pulled out the paper slip, and handed it to him. She had printed it specifically for this reason. Digital passes were too easy to dismiss as glitches. Brock snatched it. He stared at it. "Vivienne Toussaint, seat 1A. He frowned. He looked at her again, his eyes narrowing. "How did you purchase this ticket?" "With a credit card," Vivienne said. Her voice was calm, steady. "Which one?" "Does it matter?" "It matters." Brock leaned in, one hand resting on the top of her pod suite. "Because we have strict protocols regarding dress code and conduct in first class. And quite frankly, I suspect this ticket was obtained fraudulently. Stolen miles? Employee pass abuse?" Vivian let out a short, dry laugh. "I assure you, Captain, the ticket is valid, and my attire is comfortable. I wasn't aware Billionaire enforced a tuxedo policy for sleep." Brock's face reddened. He wasn't used to backtalk. He was Captain Brock Harrison. He had landed planes in typhoons. He was a god in the sky. "Listen to me," he growled, dropping the veneer of politeness. "I have a VIP at the gate who needs this seat, a man who actually keeps this airline in business. You are going to gather your things, and you are going to move back to row 42. I'll be generous and find you a middle seat so you don't get kicked off entirely." "No," Vivian said. She picked up her water glass and took a sip. The silence in the cabin was deafening. The tech CEO in 2A lowered his newspaper. The actress in 3F pulled down her sunglasses. "Excuse me?" Brock asked, stunned. "I said no. I paid for this seat. I am sitting in this seat." Brock straightened up. He adjusted his tie. A vein throbbed in his temple. "Sharon!" he barked. The flight attendant rushed over. "Yes, Captain?" "Call the gate agent. Tell them to bring security. We have a non-compliant passenger refusing a direct order from the pilot in command. I want her off the manifest. Completely." Sharon looked at Vivian, her eyes pleading. "Ma'am, please, just move. He's the captain. He has the authority to remove anyone he deems a security risk." "Is that what I am?" Vivian asked, looking Brock dead in the eye. "A security risk, or just an eyesore for your ego?" "Get security," Brock spat. "Now!" The walk from the gate to the plane is usually filled with anticipation. For the two security officers, Officer Miller and Officer Davis, it was filled with annoyance. They hated these calls. Usually, it was a drunk bachelor party member or someone who refused to wear a seatbelt. When they arrived at the door of the 777, Captain Harrison was waiting for them, arms crossed, tapping his foot. "About time," Harrison snapped. "She's in 1A, refusing to vacate. Get her out so we can push back. We're already burning slot time." Officer Miller, a burly man who had seen it all, looked at the captain. "Is she violent? Drunk?" "She's defiant," Harrison said, "and she's occupying a seat she didn't pay for. I'm the captain, and I'm declaring her a threat to the orderly conduct of the flight. That's all you need to know." Miller sighed and walked into the first-class cabin. He expected a belligerent drunk. What he found was a small black woman in a hoodie, calmly reading a copy of the Financial Times. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice softening. Vivian looked up. "Officers, the captain wants you removed from the aircraft." "On what grounds?" Vivian asked. Miller looked back at Harrison, who was hovering in the galley like a vulture. Captain says you're refusing orders. He ordered me to give up the seat I paid $24,000 for, so his friend could sit here, Vivian said clearly. Her voice carried to the back of the first-class cabin. I refused that request. That is not a security threat. That is a breach of contract on his part. She's lying. Harrison stepped forward, his face flushed. She's a fraud. Look at her. She probably stole that credit card. I want her off, Miller. If you don't drag her off, I'm calling the airport police chief. I play golf with him on Sundays. The threat hung in the air. Miller knew Harrison. He knew the type, God complex. But the law of the sky was clear. The pilot in command had absolute authority. If the pilot said someone doesn't fly, they don't fly. Ma'am, Miller said, looking apologetic, I can't overrule the captain. You have to come with us. You can sort this out with the airline on the ground. Please don't make us use force. Vivian looked at Miller. She saw a man just doing his job. Then she looked at Harrison. She saw a man who needed to be broken. She closed the newspaper. She folded it neatly. She reached down and picked up her leather tote bag, a Hermes Birkin, though Harrison wouldn't recognize it because it was well-loved and devoid of flashy logos. Very well, Vivian said. She stood up. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood with a posture that made her look 6 feet tall. She turned to Harrison. You are making a mistake, Captain. A career-ending one. Harrison laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. I've been flying for 30 years, sweetheart. I've thrown off senators. I think I can handle a girl in a hoodie. Get off my plane. Vivian stepped into the aisle. As she walked past the other passengers, the tech CEO in 2A, a man named David Chen, founder of Nexus Loop, caught her eye. This is bullish *T, Chen muttered. You want me to record this? No need, David, Vivian said, using his name. She had almost bought his company 3 years ago. I have it handled. Enjoy your flight. The service on Meridian is usually exceptional. She walked past the galley. She stopped in front of Harrison. What is your full name, Captain? She asked. Captain Brock Harrison, he sneered, tapping the gold wings on his chest. Spell it right in your blog post. I will, Vivian said. She walked out of the jet bridge, flanked by the officers. The cold, damp air of the terminal hit her. Behind her, she heard Harrison's booming voice. All right, get Mr. Kensington on board. Let's move, people. Vivian walked up the ramp, her mind racing. She wasn't thinking about anger. She was thinking about strategy. She needed a phone. She needed a signal. And she needed the direct line to the chairman of the board. As they reached the gate area, the gate agent, a woman named Sarah, looked at Vivian with sympathy. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I tried to tell him you were legitimate. He wouldn't listen. It's not your fault, Sarah, Vivian said. She pulled out her phone. Can I rebook you? Sarah asked. There's a flight to JFK on British Airways in 2 hours. No, Vivian said. She unlocked her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. I won't be needing another flight, and neither will Captain Harrison. She dialed a number. It rang once, twice. Hello? A voice answered. It was groggy. It was 4 a.m. in New York. Charles, Vivian said. It's Vivian. On the other end of the line was Charles Whitmore, the chairman of Meridian Air, the man who technically answered to her. Vivian, my God, is everything okay? Why are you calling this late? I'm at Heathrow. I just got kicked off flight 404 by the captain because he didn't like my hoodie and wanted to give my seat to his friend. There was a silence on the line. A long, terrified silence. What? Charles whispered. He kicked me off, Charles. Me, the owner. Oh, Jesus, Charles breathed. I want that plane grounded, Vivian said. Her voice was ice. It does not leave the tarmac. Do you understand me? I'm on it. I'm calling ops right now. Vivian, I am so sorry. Don't apologize to me, Charles, Vivian said, watching through the glass as the jet bridge retracted from the plane. Save it for the press conference. Down on the tarmac, the engines of Flight 404 began to whine. Captain Harrison was running through his pre-flight checklist, feeling smug. He had won. He was the king of the sky. He had no idea that the tower was about to deny his clearance. Back in the cockpit of Flight 404, Captain Brock Harrison was feeling the rush of adrenaline that only came from absolute control. He adjusted his headset, the leather cups pressing comfortably against his ears. He glanced out the windshield at the grey, weeping London sky. To him, the rain wasn't a nuisance. It was just another element he would conquer. "Pre-flight checklist complete," said First Officer Dan Reynolds. Dan was 20 years younger than Brock, a sharp, by-the-book pilot who had watched the entire incident with Vivienne Toussaint in uncomfortable silence. He hadn't said anything. You didn't question Brock Harrison if you wanted a career at Meridian Air, but his hands were gripping the yoke a little tighter than necessary. "Good," Brock grunted. He reached for the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Apologies for the slight delay at the gate. We had a minor security issue that has been resolved. We are now cleared for departure. Flight time to New York is 7 hours and 20 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service." He clicked off the mic and turned to Dan with a smirk. "See? Problem solved. You let people walk all over you, Dan, and they'll treat your cockpit like a bus stop. You have to assert dominance." Dan stared at the instrument panel. She didn't seem like a security threat, Brock. She was reading a newspaper. "She was defying a direct order," Brock snapped. "And look at the manifest now. Mr. Kensington is in 1A, a man who spends $300,000 a year with this airline. That's who pays our salaries, Dan. Not some hoodie-wearing tourist who probably gamed the system with credit card points. In seat 1A, Mr. Kensington, a red-faced man in a tailored suit that strained at the buttons, was already settling in. He was the CEO of an energy firm, loud, boisterous, and exactly the kind of good old boy Brock idolized. "Finally!" Kensington boomed, holding out his empty glass to Sharon. "Get me a scotch. Neat. And tell Brock he owes me a round of golf for the wait." "Right away, Mr. Kensington," Sharon said, her voice trembling slightly. She was still thinking about the woman in the hoodie. There was something about her eyes, something ancient and terrifyingly calm, that Sharon couldn't shake. Up front, Brock radioed the tower. "Heathrow Tower, Meridian 404. Ready for pushback." The radio crackled. Usually the response was immediate. "Meridian 404, pushback approved." Instead, there was silence. Brock frowned. "Heathrow Tower, Meridian 404, requesting pushback. Over." Static. Then a voice came over the frequency. It wasn't the usual rhythmic cadence of the air traffic controller. It was the frantic, high-pitched voice of the ground controller. "Meridian 404, hold position. Do not push. I repeat, do not push back." Brock sighed, rolling his eyes. "Copy, Tower. Holding. What's the delay? Traffic? Negative. 404. We have a stop order." Brock froze. "A stop order? From who? ATC? No, Captain. It's a company stop. Meridian Operations has flagged your flight. You are to hold at the gate until further notice. Do not start engines." Brock slammed his hand onto the center console. Unbelievable. Those idiots in ops probably messed up the cargo weight paperwork again. This is why I hate flying out of London. He turned to Dan. "Get ops on the company frequency. Tell them to clear the board. I have a slot to hit." Dan dialed in the company frequency. He spoke quietly for a moment, listening, his face growing paler by the second. He swallowed hard and looked at Brock. "Brock," Dan whispered. "What? Did they find the paperwork? They want us to shut down the APU, Auxiliary Power Unit. They want the engines off. And they said..." Dan hesitated, looking terrified. "They said what, man? Spit it out." "They said the order came from the chairman, Charles Whitmore." Brock blinked. The name hung in the tiny cockpit like a lead balloon. Charles Whitmore was a god in the airline industry. He didn't get involved in individual flights. He dealt with mergers, acquisitions, and government lobbying. He didn't delay a 777 because of paperwork. Whitmore. Brock laughed nervously. You heard wrong. Probably some mid-level manager named Whitmore. Why would the chairman care about Flight 404? They said, Dan pressed his earpiece closer, they said the aircraft is being impounded effectively, immediately pending an internal investigation. Impounded? Brock unbuckled his seatbelt. For what? Suddenly the plane shook. It wasn't the engines starting. It was the sound of the jet bridge, the heavy mechanical walkway, reconnecting to the fuselage. Thud. Clank. Whir. They're redocking, Dan said. They're coming aboard. Brock felt a spike of anger. This was incompetence. Someone was going to get fired for this. He stood up, grabbing his hat. I'm going to handle this, Brock snarled. I'm going to go out there and tear a strip off whoever authorized this. We are leaving this gate in 5 minutes, or heads are going to roll. He stormed out of the cockpit, bursting into the galley. Sharon was standing by the door, looking confused as the heavy lock turned. Open it, Sharon, Brock barked. Captain, we're supposed to be leaving. Open the damn door! Sharon disarmed the slide and rotated the heavy handle. The door swung open. Brock stepped forward, his chest puffed out, ready to scream at a gate agent. Listen here, you incompetent. The words died in his throat. Standing in the jet bridge wasn't a gate agent. It was Arthur Penhaligon, the station manager for Billionaire in the UK. Arthur was a serious man, a man who wore 3-piece suits and never smiled, and standing next to him, with her arms crossed and a phone pressed to her ear, was the woman in the hoodie. Vivienne? She wasn't looking at the ground anymore. She was looking at Brock. And this time, she was smiling. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Captain Harrison, Arthur said. His voice was cold. Step out of the aircraft. Arthur, Brock stammered. What is going on? This woman? I had her removed. She's a security risk. Why is she back? Vivian lowered her phone. I'm back, Captain, because I own the plane. Brock stared at her. His brain couldn't process the sentence. You, what? I own the plane, Vivian repeated, taking a step forward. I own the seat you kicked me out of. I own the uniform you're wearing. I own the fuel in the wings. I own Meridian Air. She held up her phone. On the screen was a video call. The face on the screen was Charles Whitmore. Brock. Charles's voice came through the tiny speaker, tinny but unmistakable. You are relieved of command. Effective immediately. The silence in the entryway of the Boeing 777 was absolute. Even the hum of the airport terminal seemed to fade away. Captain Brock Harrison stood frozen, 1 foot on the plane, 1 foot on the jet bridge. His face had gone from a flush of anger to a sickly ash-grey color. He looked at the phone screen. It really was Charles Whitmore. He looked at Arthur, the station manager. Arthur was refusing to make eye contact, staring strictly at Brock's epaulets. Then he looked at Vivian. She looked different now. 10 minutes ago, he had seen a hood rat trying to sneak into first class. Now, he noticed the way she stood. The absolute stillness. The terrifying confidence. It was the posture of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. Mr. Whitmore, Brock stuttered, his voice cracking. Sir, I don't understand. This passenger, she refused a direct order. I was following protocol. The safety of the flight. Cut the crap, Brock, Whitmore's voice snapped from the phone. I've heard the recording from the cockpit voice recorder. We live-streamed the last 10 minutes of audio to ops. You didn't remove her for safety. You removed her because you wanted to give a free upgrade to your drinking buddy, Kensington, and because you didn't think a black woman in a hoodie could possibly afford a first-class ticket. I had reason to suspect fraud. Brock grasped at straws. She looked suspicious. Suspicious? Vivian spoke up. Her voice was low, smooth and lethal. Because I wasn't wearing pearls. Because I didn't have a white assistant carrying my bags. She took a step closer to him. Brock actually took a step back. Do you know how much due diligence I did before I bought this airline, Captain? Vivian asked. I looked at the financials, the routes, the fleet. But I also looked at the culture. I heard rumors that Meridian had become an old boys club, that the senior captains were running it like their personal country club. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt, she gestured to the plane. So I flew, incognito, to see how you treat your customers, the people who actually pay your salary. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Brock, Arthur, and the flight attendants could hear. And you treated me like garbage. You humiliated me. You tried to make me feel small so you could feel big. Ma'am, please. Brock was sweating now. Beads of perspiration were rolling down his forehead. I made a mistake in judgment. It's been a long week. If you let me fly this leg, I promise, I will apologize to the passengers. I'll make it right. Vivian laughed. It was a genuine laugh of disbelief. Fly this leg? Captain, you aren't just off this flight. You're done. She turned to Arthur. Mr. Penhaligon, please escort Mr. Harrison off my property. His security clearance is revoked. He is not to access any Meridian facilities, crew lounges, or systems. Understood, Miss Toussaint, Arthur said. He turned to Brock. Give me your badge, Brock. You can't do this, Brock shouted, panic setting in. I have a contract. The union will shut this airline down. You can't fire a senior captain without a tribunal. Watch me, Vivian said. You breached your contract when you committed fraud by upgrading a non-revenue passenger over a paying customer and then falsified a security threat to cover it up. That is gross misconduct. You're lucky I don't sue you for the delay costs. Arthur, don't do this, Brock pleaded, as the station manager held out his hand. Badge, Brock, now. With trembling hands, Brock unclipped his ID badge from his shirt. He handed it over. He felt naked. Without that badge, he was just a man in a costume. And the wings, Vivian said. Brock looked up. What? The wings on your chest, Vivian said, pointing. They represent the authority of Meridian Air. You don't have that authority anymore. Take them off. Brock stared at her with pure hatred, but the fight had left him. He slowly unpinned the gold wings. He held them in his hand for a second, feeling their weight, before dropping them into Vivian's outstretched palm. Now get out of my sight, she said. Brock Harrison turned around. He saw the two security officers who had escorted Vivian off earlier. They were standing at the top of the jet bridge, watching. They didn't look sympathetic. Brock walked past them, his head down, a fallen king. Vivian watched him go, then took a deep breath. She turned to the open door of the plane. Sharon and the other flight attendants were standing there, looking terrified. They thought they were next. Vivian's expression softened. She looked at Sharon. Sharon, was it? Yes. Yes, Miss Toussaint, Sharon squeaked. You tried to stop him, Vivian said. I saw that. You tried to tell him I was legitimate. You did your job. You have nothing to worry about. Sharon let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. Thank you, ma'am. However, Vivian said, her eyes hardening again as she looked past Sharon into the cabin. We have a problem in seat 1A. Is Mr. Kensington still enjoying his scotch? Yes, ma'am. He's quite upset about the delay. Good, Vivian said. She stepped onto the plane. I think it's time I had a chat with the man who is sitting in my seat. She walked into the first-class cabin. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The passengers had heard the shouting. They had seen the captain leave and not come back. When Vivian walked in, David Chen, the tech CEO in 2A, looked up. His jaw dropped. He looked from her to the empty cockpit, then back to her. A slow grin spread across his face. He realized exactly what had just happened. Vivian walked straight to seat 1A. Mr. Kensington was busy typing on his phone, muttering about incompetence. He looked up and saw Vivian standing there. You again? Kensington groaned. Look, love, I don't know how you got back on, but the captain settled this. Go find a seat in the back. I'm busy. Vivian didn't move. She simply tapped the armrest of his suite. Mr. Kensington, she said, you are sitting in a seat that was paid for by Vivian Toussaint. You, however, are traveling on a buddy pass granted by a pilot who has just been fired for gross misconduct. Kensington went purple. Fired? Brock. Don't be ridiculous. He's the best pilot they have. He was, Vivian corrected. Now he is unemployed. And you are trespassing. Trespassing? Kensington stood up, knocking his tray table. Do you know who I am? I spend $300,000 a year. Yes, I heard, Vivian interrupted. That's a lot of money. But it's not enough to buy this airline, which is what I did. Kensington froze. You're the owner. I am, and I have a strict policy about non-revenue passengers abusing staff and displacing paying customers. She pointed to the door. You have two choices, Mr. Kensington. You can pay the full fare for this seat right now, which is $24,000 for a last-minute booking, or you can get off my plane. Kensington looked around. The entire cabin was watching. The actress in 3F was filming on her phone. David Chen was chuckling openly. This is extortion, Kensington sputtered. No, Vivian said, her voice cool and final. This is capitalism. You want the premium product? You pay the premium price. No more free rides. Kensington looked at the credit card machine Sharon was holding out, then at the open door. His pride warred with his wallet. I'll take the next flight, he muttered, grabbing his briefcase. Wise choice, Vivian said, though I should warn you, I'm putting a note on your file. If you ever abuse my crew again, that $300,000 will be spent at British Airways because you'll be banned from Meridian for life. Kensington fled. He didn't walk, he scurried. Vivian stood in the aisle. She felt the exhaustion returning, but it was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came after cleaning house. She turned to the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, raising her voice slightly, I apologize for the delay and the theatrics. We are going to have a new flight crew assigned immediately. We should be underway in 45 minutes. As compensation for the disturbance, everyone on board this flight, in all classes, will be receiving a travel voucher equal to the value of their ticket. And for my friends here in first class, she nodded to the flight attendant, open the vintage Dom Perignon, the 2008, on the house. As the cabin erupted in polite applause, Vivian sank back into seat 1A. She pulled her hoodie up. She closed her eyes. She had fires to put out in New York. She had a board meeting to prepare for. But for now, she just wanted to sleep. But outside the plane, the story was far from over. Brock Harrison was in the terminal, and he wasn't going quietly. And the video David Chen had just uploaded to Twitter was about to go viral. While Flight 404 was climbing through 30,000 feet over the Atlantic, a different kind of turbulence was erupting on the ground at Heathrow. Brock Harrison sat in a dark corner of the Aviator, a pub in Terminal 3 that was usually frequented by off-duty baggage handlers and delayed tourists. He wasn't wearing his jacket or his hat. His tie was loosened. He looked less like a senior captain and more like a man whose life was dissolving in real time. He slammed his hand on the sticky wooden table. I'm telling you, Mike, it's a wrongful termination suit waiting to happen. It's a slam dunk. He was on the phone with Mike, the Bulldog, Kowalski, the senior union representative for the Pilots Association. Mike was a man who enjoyed a fight, but he liked winning fights even more. Walk me through it again, Brock. Mike's voice crackled through the phone. You're saying the owner, the actual owner, was on the plane, and you didn't know? Nobody knew, Brock shouted, drawing annoyed glances from a table of backpackers nearby. She was dressed like a vagrant, Mike. Hoodie, messy hair. She looked like she belonged in the cargo hold, not first class. I made a judgment call to protect the brand image. And the passenger you upgraded? Kensington? A high-value client, Brock lied smoothly. vital to the airline's interests. Brock, Mike sighed. I'm looking at the internal memo right now. It says Kensington was on a buddy pass. That's personal travel. You bumped a revenue passenger, the owner, no less, for a buddy pass. That's a firing offense even if she wasn't a billionaire. She refused a direct order, Brock insisted, his knuckles white as he gripped his whiskey glass. That's the angle, Mike. Insubordination. Safety of flight. As soon as I said get off, she was legally obligated to move. We go to the press. We paint her as an entitled billionaire who thinks rules don't apply to her. We play the safety first card. The public loves a pilot who stands his ground. There was a silence on the other end. Mike, you there? Brock, are you near a TV? Yeah, there's one above the bar. Why? Turn it to the news. Now. Brock frowned. He signaled the bartender to turn up the volume on the flat-screen TV mounting the wall. It was tuned to a global 24-hour news network. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking, airline owner ejected by pilot in racial profiling scandal." Brock's blood ran cold. What? On the screen, a shaky video was playing. It was high definition, shot from seat 2A. It showed Brock looming over Vivian. The audio was crisp. Does she look like she dropped 20 grand on a seat? She looks like she got lost on her way to economy basic. The video cut to Vivian's calm, steel-spined response. Is that what I am? A security risk? Or just an eyesore for your ego? Then the commentary started. The news anchor was joined by an aviation expert. This is shocking footage, the anchor said. We are seeing a senior captain of Meridian Air seemingly harassing a quiet, compliant passenger, based solely on her appearance. Sources confirm that the passenger was, in fact, Vivian Toussaint, the majority shareholder of the airline. It's a PR nightmare, the expert added. But more than that, it exposes a culture of arrogance. Look at his body language. That pilot isn't enforcing safety. He's enforcing a hierarchy. And he just picked a fight with the wrong woman. Brock lowered the phone. His mouth was dry. Where did they get that video? Twitter, Mike said, his voice sounding distant and defeated. A guy named David Chen posted it 20 minutes ago. It has 4 million views already, Brock. The hashtag #MeridianRacist is trending #1 globally. Chen, Brock whispered, the tech CEO in 2A. The guy he had ignored. I can't defend this, Brock, Mike said. The union protects pilots from unfair dismissal. We don't protect pilots who get caught on 4K video calling the owner of the airline a fraud because of her skin color. You're on your own. Mike, wait. The line went dead. Brock stared at the phone. He looked around the bar. The bartender was looking at the TV, then slowly turned his gaze toward Brock. Recognition dawned in the bartender's eyes. Disgust followed. Brock threw a 20-pound note on the table and ran. He needed to get out of the airport. He needed to get to a lawyer who wasn't afraid of a fight. He wasn't done. He was Brock Harrison. He had $20 million in a pension fund. He had a reputation. He would sue them all. Meanwhile, at 38,000 feet, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin of Flight 404 was serene. But the digital world was burning. Vivian sat with her laptop open. She had paid for the high-speed Wi-Fi. Her inbox was exploding. 400 emails in the last hour. PR firms, board members, investors, journalists. David Chen, in seat 2A, leaned across the aisle. I hope you didn't mind me posting that, he said. I figured you'd want the evidence out there before he tried to spin it. Vivian looked at him. Usually I prefer to handle things quietly, David. But in this case, I think transparency was necessary. Thank you. He's trending, David said, showing her his phone. People are digging up his old forum posts. Apparently he's been complaining about diversity hires on pilot forums for years, under the handle SkyKing88. The internet detectives work fast. Vivian sighed. This was the problem. It wasn't just one bad apple. It was a rot she hadn't seen. "I'm going to have to clean house," she murmured. "Not just him. The whole culture." "Well," David smiled, raising his glass of Dom Perignon. "If anyone can do it, it's the woman who stared down a 777 captain without blinking, to the new meridian." Vivian clinked her glass against his. To the new meridian. But she knew the hard part was just beginning. Firing Brock was easy. Surviving the legal onslaught he was undoubtedly preparing would be the real test. Brock was a man with resources, and a man with a wounded ego is the most dangerous litigant on earth. 48 hours later, the storm made landfall in New York. The Meridian Air headquarters in Manhattan was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the Hudson River. On the 50th floor, the main conference room was prepped for war. On one side of the long mahogany table sat the Meridian legal team, led by General Counsel Jessica Pearson, a woman known in the industry as the Viper. Next to her sat Charles Whitmore, the chairman, looking pale and exhausted. And at the head of the table sat Vivian Toussaint. She was no longer wearing a hoodie. She was wearing a bespoke white suit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, flawless chignon. She looked every inch the billionaire titan. On the other side of the table sat Brock Harrison. He had managed to find a lawyer, a high-priced fixer named Saul Berkowitz, who specialized in wrongful termination suits for disgraced executives. Brock looked different. He was shaved, wearing his best suit, and he had regained some of his arrogant swagger. He believed he had leverage. "Let's cut to the chase," Berkowitz started, opening a thick leather binder. "My client, Captain Harrison, was terminated without due process. His contract explicitly states that any disciplinary action regarding safety decisions made by the pilot in command must go through a tribunal review. You bypassed that. You fired him on the spot. That is a breach of contract." Pearson, the general counsel, didn't even look up from her notes. "The contract also has a gross misconduct clause, Mr. Berkowitz. Clause 14, Section B. Any action that brings the airline into severe disrepute or involves fraudulent use of company assets is grounds for immediate termination without tribunal." "Fraudulent?" Brock scoffed. "I upgraded a loyal customer. That's discretion, not fraud." "We have the logs, Brock," Charles Whitmore said quietly. "Mr. Kensington wasn't a loyal customer. He was your college roommate. You've upgraded him to first class on international flights 6 times in the last 2 years. That's over $100,000 in stolen revenue." "And let's talk about the disrepute," Vivian said. Her voice was calm, cutting through the legal jargon. "Meridian stock dropped 4% yesterday morning. Do you know how much money that is, Captain? That's $300 million in market cap, wiped out because you couldn't check a manifest." Brock leaned forward. "That's on you," he spat. "You made it a spectacle. If you had just moved to the back, none of this would have happened. You entrapped me." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "I sat in my assigned seat. That is not entrapment. That's existing." "Look," Berkowitz interjected, sensing his client was losing ground. "We are prepared to sue for defamation. You called him a racist on a recorded line. You destroyed his reputation. He can never fly again. We want a settlement. $20 million, the value of his pension plus damages, and a non-disclosure agreement. We walk away, and the video disappears." Vivian laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "You think I want the video to disappear?" she asked. She stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city. "Mr. Berkowitz, you seem to be under the impression that this is a negotiation. It is not. This is a notification." She turned back to face them. "I am not settling. I am countersuing." Brock blinked. You're what?" "I am suing you, Brock Harrison, for breach of fiduciary duty and civil fraud regarding the Kensington upgrades. We are auditing your flight history going back 20 years. Every bottle of wine you took home, every buddy pass you traded for golf favors. We will find it all." "You can't do that," Brock stammered. "I can, and I am, but that's not the worst part for you." Vivian pressed a button on the intercom. Send him in." The heavy oak doors opened. A man in a Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) uniform walked in. It was Inspector Valenti, a man with a reputation for being absolutely humorless. Brock's face went white. "Valenti, what are you doing here?" "Captain Harrison," Inspector Valenti said, placing a letter on the table. "The FAA has reviewed the cockpit voice recorder data provided by Meridian Air, specifically the conversation you had with First Officer Reynolds prior to the incident." "That's private conversation," Brock shouted. "Not when you are on duty in a commercial airliner," Valenti corrected. "You were recorded stating, 'I don't care about the weight distribution.' You knowingly ignored a weight and balance warning to accommodate an extra passenger, Mr. Kensington, and his luggage. You compromised the safety of the aircraft for a personal favor." Valenti tapped the letter. "We are launching a formal investigation into your fitness to hold an airline transport pilot license. Effective immediately, your medical certificate is suspended pending a psychiatric evaluation for narcissism and anti-authority traits." Brock slumped back in his chair. Losing his job was one thing. Losing his license, his wings, was death. It was his entire identity. "This is a witch hunt," Brock whispered. "No, Brock," Vivian said, sitting back down. "This is consequences. You spent 30 years thinking you were a god because you knew how to land a plane. You forgot that you're just a bus driver with a fancy hat. And when you treat people like dirt, eventually you get buried." She looked at Berkowitz. "There will be no 20 million. There will be no pension. We are freezing his assets, pending the fraud investigation. If he wants to fight this in court, tell him to save his money. He's going to need it for the legal fees, because I have more lawyers than he has friends." Berkowitz closed his binder. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. He looked at Brock. "I think we should go." Brock didn't move for a moment. He stared at Vivian. He searched for the fear he used to see in people's eyes when he yelled at them. He found none. He saw only a mirror reflecting his own smallness. He stood up, his legs shaky. He walked to the door. "You ruined my life," he said, his voice trembling. "You did that yourself, Captain," Vivian replied, not looking up from her papers. "I just turned on the lights." As Brock Harrison walked out of the Meridian building, stripped of his title, his pension, and his dignity, he was met by a wall of flashing lights. The press had found out where the meeting was. "Captain Harrison! Captain Harrison! Is it true you falsified weight manifests? Captain, do you have a comment on the racism allegations? Captain, are you going to jail?" Brock pushed through the crowd, shielding his face. A week ago, he was the king of the sky. Today, he was a cautionary tale. Back in the office, Vivienne watched the scene on the news from her wall monitor. Charles Whitmore cleared his throat. "Vivienne, that was intense. But are you sure about the countersuit? It's going to drag this out in the press." "Let it drag out," Vivian said. "I want every pilot, every gate agent, and every executive in this industry to see what happens when you judge a book by its cover." She turned to Charles. "Now, Charles, let's talk about the board. I think it's time for some diversity training. And I'm not talking about a PowerPoint presentation. I'm talking about a complete restructure." Charles nodded, knowing better than to argue. "Yes, Vivian, where do we start?" Vivian smiled. "We start with Flight 404. I want to meet the first officer, Dan Reynolds, the one who tried to warn him. I think he's ready for a promotion." 5 years later, Meridian Air was unrecognizable. It wasn't just the rebrand, the sleek new livery or the modernized uniforms. It was the soul of the company. It had become the gold standard for inclusivity and service, consistently voted the #1 airline in the world. Captain Dan Reynolds sat in the left seat of the cockpit of a brand-new Airbus A350. He was the chief pilot now, a position he had earned not through bullying, but through the Toussaint Protocol, a rigorous leadership program Vivian had instituted that prioritized emotional intelligence as highly as technical skill. As he prepared for the descent into Tokyo, Dan glanced at the passenger manifest. There were no VIP codes or secret favors, just names. "Captain," the first officer said, "we have a passenger in 42C asking if he can visit the cockpit after landing. Says he's an aviation enthusiast." "Let him in," Dan smiled. "The owner loves enthusiasts." Vivian Toussaint was on board, but she wasn't in first class. She was in premium economy, chatting with a grandmother about knitting patterns. She still flew incognito once a month, but her employees no longer feared her presence. They welcomed it, knowing she was there to support them, not to catch them out. And as for Brock Harrison, karma had been absolute. Stripped of his license and buried under legal fees, he had been forced to sell his luxury condo. He couldn't even get a job flying cargo in Alaska. His name was toxic in the industry. The last anyone saw of the former King of the Sky, he was working as a manager for a chaotic airport shuttle bus service in New Jersey. He spent his days arguing with tourists about luggage space, standing on the curb in a cheap, ill-fitting vest, watching the big jets roar overhead, planes he would never touch again. He was grounded, in every sense of the word. Vivian looked out the window as the plane banked over the glittering city lights. She had bought an airline to save a business, but she had ended up saving its humanity. She closed her eyes, finally able to sleep, knowing that in her sky, everyone was treated like royalty. And that is the story of how one pilot's arrogance ran headfirst into a billionaire's justice. It's a powerful reminder that in today's world, you never truly know who you are talking to. Captain Harrison judged a book by its cover, and he paid for it with his career. Vivian Toussaint showed us that true power isn't about shouting orders or demanding upgrades. It's about respect, integrity, and standing your ground when you know you're right. It makes you wonder, how many times have we judged someone just by looking at them? And how different would the world be if we treated the person in the hoodie the same way we treat the person in the suit? If you enjoyed this story of high-flying karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to stay humble, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Let me know in the comments, have you ever seen someone get instant karma in real life? I want to hear your stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.